Hi, I'm Dr. Nicole Lipkin, and this is the Hey Kiddo podcast where we talk about all things parenting. Today, we're talking with Emily Charles, an occupational therapist and Montessori educator specializing in pediatric care since 2009. And I am so excited to chat with you today, Emily. I have so many questions for you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
So, Emily, I want to start from the basics.
Okay.
Even as a psychologist, I've never fully understood OT. Can you break it down for us?
Well, OT is a huge field. So before I decided to specialize in pediatrics, they kind of have you go through as part of training all of the different settings where you can practice, right? So you might work with an occupational therapist if you're in the hospital, and that person is going to make sure that you're safe to do your occupations, whether that's
Okay.
caring for children, which you might need to be lifting things, or
Right.
just making sure you can even do basic transfers before you're discharged from the hospital safely, so they know you can go back to living independently. I worked in as part of a field work stint at
Mm-hmm.
a health facility. And then, but pediatrics, really, I knew from the start that's really where I wanted to end up. But all that to say, OT is just this huge, broad field. Within pediatrics, there are even different settings. There's outpatient, there's school, there's just different ways that you can approach this. So within the scope of pediatrics, I've focused on this niche corner, which is sensory processing and integration. And that's where I
Okay.
really found a passion. And working on that in the clinic is great. It's a really fun job. We have access to swings and tunnels and all of the fun play things that you can use to support someone's sensory processing. But where I've really found a great challenge that's interesting is how to bring that level of integration and support into the classroom directly. So,
Right.
what OT is within what I'm doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Focusing on how to support the occupations of the 3 to 6 year olds that I work with on a daily basis. Their
Mm-hmm.
occupations being a student, being a friend, being a person who's trying to go through self-care and learning their own self-regulation.
Mm.
So what is occupational therapy in school? What does it look like? I'm trying to support their self-regulation. And that's a word that we might hear a lot today. So self-regulation,
Right.
to me, that means getting to a place where you feel like you're at your optimal level of alertness. You're not
Okay.
too giddy, too silly. You're not at this excitatory place where you really are not most available to learn, right?
Okay.
You're
Mm-hmm.
also not running kind of low. You're not too sleepy. You're not at a really low level of arousal, where also you're not your most available to learn. So, really trying to support nervous system arousal so that you're right there in the sweet spot to be able to
Okay.
most optimally learn and interact with your friends and control your own body and your own emotions in a way that supports your social interaction and behavior. That is currently what I am doing each day in the classroom.
Okay. I'm so glad you broke it down that way because I never understood occupational therapy in those terms. And you look at the occupation of a child.
Sure.
So,
And
you
a
know,
question I used to get when I would tell people I'm in school for occupational therapy, I'm going to go into pediatrics, and people would say, like, why do kids need jobs? Because occupation also means
right,
the,
right.
like, not the jobs we're getting paid for, but the work of being a person,
A
changing,
child or
ending up.
whatever it might be.
Right. And the work of being a child is play
Okay.
and learning how to control all of the highs and lows that are happening
Okay.
in a growing body.
And you said you specialize with sensory processing. So why don't you break down what sensory processing is through
Sure.
the lens? Yeah.
Great. So, I mean, I think everybody has heard in school that our five senses, right? So the things that we see, touch, taste, hear, and feel. And I would argue that those are great. Those are the basics, but we're missing the three key ones, which are vestibular processing is part of our sensory system, our proprioceptive sense, and our interoceptive sense. So vestibular is the way that your head position lets you know where you are in space, how balance and movement, how you're moving through space.
Okay.
The proprioceptive system is the input that you're getting from your muscles and joints. This allows you to know your body awareness, where you are, and how your body is moving.
Okay.
It dictates kind of your force. We use in the classroom setting, it's one of our classroom rules to be gentle, right? To be safe.
Yep.
That's what lets you know if you're being gentle, right? Your proprioceptive system lets you know how hard to throw a wiffle ball versus a bowling ball, right?
Right.
It's
Right.
the input that you're getting gives you information, if you're organizing that information efficiently, for how to plan your output, your motor output.
Okay.
And then your interoceptive sense is your awareness of if I'm feeling hot, if I'm cold, if I'm hungry, if I'm thirsty, if I'm sick, if I'm well. And without proper body awareness and that the awareness that comes from all of these systems working in sync together, you might not have a very strong awareness of I'm hungry, or really hungry might also feel like I'm sick. And there's kind of a mix up until you start to put those pieces together and organize it efficiently in a way that we can help our children understand their own regulation and then communicate that, which is, it's a pretty big skill. It's a big process.
It's big.
It's big.
Can you dumb it down a little bit for me?
Yeah.
Why do I care about it in a very young child versus what does it look like in a young child versus what does it look like in a, 5 to 8, 9 to 12? Like, what does this look like across the ages?
Yeah, it's a great question. So in a very young child, you are supporting their ability to regulate, just so that they can, you're supporting their most optimal ability to play and to learn. So learning and organizing all of the information that you're getting on a daily basis can be really overwhelming, even for a child who doesn't have a sensory processing disorder. So by having occupational therapy, or by having sort of a strategic sensory diet, or sensory strategies, that can be helpful to get to the most optimal place. So you're supporting their nervous system's healthy development, almost the same way that you would feed them healthy foods. You would make sure you're getting exercise. You're making sure, I know you as a parent, you're making sure that social emotional skills and acceptance and inclusion, all of these different facets are important for sending these beings in a healthy direction, right? So it's just another kind of piece of that puzzle. As it starts to get to a child who's more like in the 5 to 12, those things are still important. Our sensory systems are never not growing, right? Even as adults, even as you and I, we're still growing. The concern at that age is more, have we primed their sensory system optimally in order to support their academic potential? Because it gets more challenging, not 5, but by the time you get to 8, the expectations are pretty high. Not impossible, but
high.
It's high. The output, I think, increases. What I mean by that is, right now at this age, the academics are pretty tailored to their own needs. But by the time we have an 8-year-old, they're sitting in a classroom. A full classroom might be 30 kids. They're taking all that they're hearing, seeing, feeling. They might be having the expectation to copy notes from a board. The output might be writing an essay.
Right.
So all of this processing, the sensory systems, they all play together. In a way that would impact their ease and their feelings of success with moving forward with school. So I was kind of thinking out loud. That may have been a long-winded answer. I would say the short version would be, in a really young child, play is the biggest occupation, being a friend, learning the environment. It starts to shift a little bit to being a student becomes maybe the primary occupation, pushing closer to the end of the age spectrum you gave me, like 12. Being a student that's a big occupation.
That's a big occupation.
Yeah.
So if we were to back up for a second, how do you discern if your child is having a sensory processing issue versus learning the skills of sensory processing?
Yeah, so you're going to be looking at how often does it affect your daily life, your daily routine. If you're answering almost always my child is showing certain behaviors. That's going to change depending on their sensory profile or their own sensory needs.
Like what behaviors? Like what behaviors?
I'll give you examples just based on the
Mm-hmm.
sensory pieces. So let's say your child is not processing vestibular input in an efficient way. So there's different kind of subsets of sensory processing disorder, one of them being modulation or ability to shift. So you might see that they are over responsive to vestibular input. They might become dizzy really easily. Even like if I drop my pencil on the floor in school and I bend down to pick it up and then I come back and that shift like and gets
Okay.
organizing. So their behavioral response after that might look like frustration, being kind of short and snippy with friends. It might look like it might send them into giggles. They might become really giddy. They might become kind of like the clown.
Yep.
So the flip side of that is they might be under responsive. They might need a lot more of that input to reach the threshold where they're feeling regulated just right. So they might constantly be spinning, moving, doing somersaults, like to the point where it's interfering with their ability to just be in the classroom.
Okay. So constant movement almost.
Constant movement. And that would actually, sometimes under responsive isn't the same thing as like being a sensory craver, which would be they're looking for it. Under responsive, they might not crave it. They just need a higher threshold to get there.
Okay.
So that's one example of how a vestibular you might be seeing that manifest in your child. If your child is experiencing sensory processing disorder with tactile, you're going to notice that they can't tolerate their daily routine. So they might hate to get their hair brushed, hate to get their teeth brushed. Bath time might be a nightmare. They hate to wear clothing. They complain about the way clothing feels on their bodies. And it's not just going to be one time they didn't like the shirt they're wearing. This is like every day. If this gets every day is a struggle, then you're going to know like that might be something where they need some support. Similarly, if they have proprioceptive input for muscles and joints, if they are under responsive or seeking, they might be constantly crashing into things, bumping into things. Friends might complain that they're hugging them without consent or touching them too much. They might touch everything and anything. And then of course, if they're over responsive, they won't like to be touched. They might be withdrawn or seek out sedentary play where they don't have to be moving their bodies, because the body awareness to do that action might just not be there.
Okay.
And I will say sometimes I've noticed in children, if there is a sensory processing challenge, they won't prefer to play with children their same age. In young kids, they might like to play with really older kids who are flexible enough not to care to have their say.
I see.
But when they can't control what's going to happen in the play, because something might be introduced that they don't feel confident with moving their bodies, or they might not understand the motor sequence, that might feel really overwhelming. And I have seen that even from a very young age, like 3, where, they're aware when things feel hard or feel tricky or when they can't keep up.
So I'm hearing, and I want to continue down this path of like, what are the signs, but I want to put a pin in this one. Yeah. I'm hearing the strong connection between sensory processing issues and emotional difficulties. Like I'm seeing that is hand in hand. So I want to definitely get to that, but what other signs do you see?
Right. If you feel like there's an element of your day that you just can't get through consistently because it's just a meltdown, I would say that is worth looking into.
Okay.
Other subtle signs might be socially. If there's only one person that your child is really gravitating towards, and that's where I really want to chat with you more about your way to get to it. But I have seen a correlation between anxiety and choosing a partner, a play partner, or a friend who you can predict almost to a T what's going to happen. And so that could be another telltale sign that, if your child,
that predictability.
The predictability in play partner might be an indicator too, which is a little more nuanced. But
Okay.
Just something I've observed.
What about sound? Like, sound
If
sensitivity.
there's, yes, so that would be for the auditory sensitivity, or the flip side, if you can't get enough, if you're putting your ear close to the speaker when your favorite song's on. But yes, if an ambulance is driving down the street and it's loud for everyone, but it throws your kiddo into a tantrum and they're holding their ears and screaming and it takes a long time to recover, that probably is auditory sensitivity. Or if they're getting so overwhelmed in a busy classroom that they just kind of shut down, withdraw, that's an indicator as well.
Okay. So what I'm hearing across the board is that it's something that you see every day. Every day this is triggered.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that happens to a little bit more of an extreme. Like the sound thing, it's not necessarily the loud sounds of ambulance where we all cover our ears. It
Right.
might be a behavioral response after.
Right. Yeah. It's and it doesn't need to be, that was an example, but it doesn't need to be something as, what's the word I'm looking for? Noxious.
Big. Yeah.
Right. As an ambulance. It could be if you're out at a restaurant, because most people don't really get to see their kid at school, right? If you're at a restaurant and it's really busy, or if you're at a street fair or something like that, and they just like, we got to go home. They're unhappy.
They can't do it right.
Whining. They can't. It all just might be too much. And that's consistently the case where you feel like you can't go anywhere with family. It's not fun to go do things with family. That might be an indicator that
I see.
And it might not just be one sense. It might not just be like, I have visual sensitivity or auditory. It could be many. It could be
a variety. So what do you do before we get to the social emotional part of this, if you notice something and it sounds like it impacts family life. If you notice something like this, what do you do? Like, where do you start?
Right. So as a parent,
or
as a clinician,
as a parent.
So as a parent, my biggest advice would be just to know that you're not alone. There are resources for you. Trust your gut. Because I think one misconception about sensory processing disorder, if you've heard of it at all, is that it means an intellectual disability, or it means that there's comorbid diagnosis. And that's not the case. It can be its own thing. And a child who is smart and typically functioning otherwise, neurotypically, they don't have any markers, things going on. You can be told, no, they're fine. Right. But if you know this isn't fine, then trust your gut. I've never met a mom who's wrong. And there's always something that can be done to support your nervous system. So I would recommend then talking to your pediatrician to see if you could get a referral for occupational therapy, or, there are private clinics where you can just call them. You don't need a referral. So I would seek out an occupational therapy evaluation. And an occupational therapist will use a standardized checklist or evaluation tools to determine if there is a sensory processing component, and then move forward with intervention and treatment. And if a parent, wait lists can sometimes be long. So if a parent doesn't want to wait, there are checklists available online. There's a company called Harkla, and they have pretty easy to digest, from my opinion. I say that with caution because I'm really used to the terminology, but they have some sensory checklists and some things like that are available for free online. So, and
you said Harkla?
Harkla, Harkla.
Harkla.
Parents can do some of these checklists, and then what also goes along with those checklists, if it's that particular site, is ways to implement a sensory diet. And they can show different strategies and different materials and interventions that can support that nervous system regulation through what looks like play with your child.
When you intervene early, can the nervous system be regulated?
When you don't
successfully.
Even when you don't intervene. And I do want to say, I want to edit myself a bit. Early intervention is best, but I have met several 9, 10, 11, 12-year-olds, mostly when I was still working in the clinic, who they fell through the cracks because they weren't a problem child. They didn't have a diagnosis, and their parent would always just say, like, I know something's not quite right. And it would turn out to add sensory processing challenges that we could support.
What does it look like when it doesn't regulate as adults?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I would say the profile of being a bit withdrawn when you don't have, you're kind of under responsive, if you don't have the support for your body awareness to
Mm-hmm.
give you the confidence to participate socially or with motor activities. Sometimes that can look like maybe a teen who's less confident, or
Mm,
they might appear more shy and withdrawn. Um,
that's interesting.
there's also a big academic piece. So they, if sensory challenges are not addressed before or during childhood and adolescence, they can appear to really struggle with reading and writing. And again, it's not because they're not smart. It's not because they have any kind
Right.
of diagnosis
It's a
that
processing.
it's a processing. They might appear completely exhausted just
Mm,
day at school, and then homework would be a really big fight. They might not be able to get their thoughts from their brain to the computer or their brain to the paper, depending on
mm-hmm.
if they're doing a writing assignment. They might just feel like they really hate school and they're not smart. They might feel that way. Not that they're not smart, but they might start to feel like,
Right.
I'm not smart, I'm not good, I can't do this, there must be something wrong with me. And they'll have this whole kind of negative mentality about school. I've seen that kind of play out
Okay.
in
So
children.
hold on. So
Yeah.
hold on. Hold on. Hold on. Hold
Yeah.
on. This is very interesting because how do you discern, like, teenagers like that or adolescents like that would often be brought into therapy if a parent is noticing things
Sure.
to a psychologist, a therapist's office. So
Sure.
how do you discern when it's a mental health struggle
Mm.
versus a processing struggle?
Sure. Well, the discerning when it's a mental health struggle, I don't know, because it's not within my scope to diagnose anxiety or depression. And I think some of the characteristics or reports of I'm feeling anxious or I'm feeling depressed might overlap, but
Mm,
the most I could do was see, like, if how visually processing might affect just the task of reading. And if there's a challenge there, I'll know that there's work to be done. And within progress from therapeutic intervention, if you see greater ease with that skill come from that, sometimes that can have a positive impact on your self confidence and on your mood.
sure.
But certainly it wouldn't, if you had an underlying diagnosis of anxiety or depression, it wouldn't erase that. Yeah, so I think that there are some pieces to nervous system regulation and sensory processing that can support confidence with skills that might be, they might be related to feelings of, this is
Got
so
you.
hard for me, I'm worthless, that.
I got you.
Yeah.
Okay. So so it's like they're entwined. Yeah, I mean I could imagine that if you're for a lot of your schooling life it's been so difficult and
Sure.
exhausting, I could imagine over time
Sure.
that could create some emotional struggles.
Right, right. Well, and it's not, I think I've gotten onto a track where it's just about tasks. It's not all
Mhm.
task based or task oriented,
Mhm.
right? So if someone who has really poor tactile processing and proprioceptive processing, and they haven't felt confident or comfortable taking risks to make friendships, or even to have opinions, to have, to they
Yeah.
know their own self, to have that
Mhm.
self-worth, self-esteem, when we start to give them a body, so to speak, right, by using techniques for integrating tactile and
Mhm.
proprioceptive input, when you connect the brain and body in that way, one of the outcomes is often improved social emotional health and well-being.
Mm.
You have that emotional regulation, and then you kind of know what you need. So there is an emotional intelligence about yourself and about regulation that comes from that. So I think maybe I've gotten off course from your original question a bit.
No. Well, I actually think it brings us back to what I wanted to put a pin in, that the sensory processing and the social emotional development are so entwined. So
Yeah,
if you can talk a little bit about that, is like through the age groups.
sure. Yeah. So I think the social emotional pieces that you might not be able to be present in a moment as, say, a 3 to 5 year old in the classroom, right? You might be so disconnected. Your brain and body might be so disconnected from one another that you can really only focus on your own needs and what you want. So
Right.
by using some of the intervention strategies, it supports your ability to stay regulated. So can I give you an example of what that might look like?
Yes, please.
So there was a child who had tactile defensiveness. They didn't like to be touched. They also had auditory defensiveness. So sounds were really intrusive. They felt constantly like in a fight or flight mode. They didn't like to be touched. It was really difficult to be around others. And sometimes with that profile, they were really explosive. They tended to go into this really high silly mode sometimes, or an angry mode at other times. And so working with them to support their tactile integration, which looked like using a lot of deep pressure, which is calming and organizing to the nervous system. And by using a lot of body awareness. So again, it sometimes looks like deep pressure to your muscles and joints. It can look like a lot of stretching, pushing, pulling, crawling, climbing. That boosts your brain body connection to the point where you can efficiently organize then touch input that's incoming and input to your muscles and joints, to where that child no longer felt so averse to the auditory stimulation around them. And they went on to have very healthy friendship. So this was a child who, I mean, it was years ago. They were 4 then, but at that young age, it really changed their parents' report of them being this explosive child. Like, yeah, it's just we can go to the picnic now with other families and really not have to worry about.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
So that would be an example from a younger age. Another child I remember working with in the clinical setting was very quiet, withdrawn, shy, seemingly depressed to me, but again, that's out of my scope to diagnose. And when we started working with them on skin brushing, so maybe for listeners who might not know, there's something called a TheraPressure brush. There's a big protocol that can go with it, or not. I don't usually use it to the full protocol. I find that it's really helpful to even just use it as a spot treatment. But that provides deep pressure to the tactile system. So we were using brushing with this child. We were activating his posture, his core muscles, his strength. We were working on multisensory processing. So giving modified music to listen to while doing visual tracking. And it ignited his sensory system in a way that just wasn't active before. We were opening all these neural pathways that he was like, whoa, this is going around me, and now I can process it. And his mom had said to me at one point, like, I never wanted to go anywhere. Whenever I was like, come on, let's just go to like McDonald's. He's like, no, I just want to stay in my room. And he's like, he asked me to go to the arcade, and he was like talking with other kids and playing.
Wow.
Amazing. So it really, and that child was about 8 at the time. So what's really cool is to like, these are all children I'm thinking of when I started working in like 2000.
Yeah.
It's great to be able to bring that into the classroom, where what I'm noticing is we don't really even need the big equipment. You can bring these things to everyone, not just those who have known challenges, to support their interaction skills and have them be happier and healthier. And
That's incredible. I mean, that's really cool. So you notice something. I'm
Mhm.
hearing follow your gut,
Mhm.
ask the right questions. It sounds like ask the teachers, call, get an evaluation, whatever it might be. You mentioned misperceptions around sensory processing can often be like, oh, you can't learn, or you're not learning right, or you're not socializing right.
Right.
When in fact it's an overstimulation or an understimulation
Sure.
of
And
the nervous system.
oftentimes children with sensory processing disorder are gifted. Um,
Interesting.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. So that is a misconception that,
Okay.
there's something wrong. Their sensory system just needs support for them to be able to achieve that regulation.
Is there a correlation with giftedness?
I forget the exact statistic, but I think it's somewhere like 30 to 40%.
Oh,
Don't
wow.
quote me, but
Okay.
I want to
Okay. I'm
say.
not quoting you. Okay. Okay. Is there anything, just in general, like even whether or not a child has a sensory processing issue or not, is there anything that parents can do or parenting adults can do proactively at home? Just, I'm assuming we're always
Yeah.
growing in this way.
We're always growing in this way.
Mhm.
Yes. So that goes into kind of the idea of this sensory diet, this way to support a sensory system, which should always be proactive, right? You don't want to wait until you're in that.
Mhm.
So I would say to look at your child's preferences. And there was another episode of your show that I listened to where there was a parent describing their child being on a hike and jumping on sticks. And it was
Mm. Yep, yep, yep. Uh-huh.
so even by looking at like what does your child do? If your child likes to spin, if your child likes to bump and crash, that gives you information about like, oh yeah, well they seem to feel really just right. They look really organized after they've been at the trampoline park, or like,
Right.
after they like to play rough house with,
Right.
my partner. And after that they're just like, I feel really good. So kind of look at your child's preferences and see maybe what their body needs. And then
Hmm.
strategically placing sensory activities or input throughout their day to help support their nervous system before we get to that outburst, right? So sometimes a behavior is just when their body really needs something, especially at a younger age, like maybe the 4, 5, 6
Yeah.
range, but they can't ask for it yet. So part of reaching that threshold and being able to ask for what you need is part of your emotional intelligence surrounding
Right.
your own emotional regulation. But
Wait, I'm stopping you. I'm stopping you. I'm not following one thing.
yeah.
All right. So let's say, let's say my child feels really good after wrestling and roughhousing with my partner.
Mhm.
What does that mean? Pay attention to what does that mean my child
Oh,
needs?
great. So thanks for
Yeah.
stopping me there. So I think what you would notice from that then is that deep pressure to their tactile, their touch system, and input to their muscles and joints feels really organizing. They look like they are calm, they're engaged with you, they are at that just right level of alertness.
Hmm.
So then, if you're noticing that maybe first thing in the morning or before school or before you go somewhere that's typically disorganizing, like a birthday
Yeah.
party or,
Yeah.
that picnic event, whatever it is, maybe you want to give them some squishes with a pillow. And,
I
and
see what you're saying.
the strategic part is it's very helpful to not just go at it and say like, okay, I'm just gonna push you with this pillow, which
Right.
can be really
Right.
organizing, right? But set it to a rhythm and have a pace that co-regulates. So co-regulation is using yourself, using your own regulation to support your child's regulation.
Mm.
So you're going to, just using this example of like, we love roughhouse, so I'm going to give this deep pressure input before school day, right? So
Okay.
you'll have, let's say their name's John, right? It's okay.
Okay.
Come on, John, we're gonna lay down here and I'm going to pretend I'm making you into a sandwich. Okay, so
Uh,
here's some bread. And then I like to use a song because it gives a rhythm and there's a clear
mhm.
story. So it kind of organizes the parent around like, how long should I do this? Right.
Right,
So
right, right.
it can be something even you make up. I'm going to make a sandwich. I'm going to make a sandwich. I'm going to make a sandwich, and it is you. And then meanwhile, you're kind of just giving some really organizing,
like rubs.
presses, rubs. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
For those who can't see, I'm
Yeah.
rubbing my arm from shoulder down to my hand and taking care just to make sure that that is a pace that is calming and organizing. If that's
okay.
Let's say John hates to wake up. He likes the input, but he hates to wake up.
Yeah.
So in that case, you might use more vigorous rubs.
Yeah.
A more rapid pace, right?
Okay.
Is alerting.
Okay.
Slower is calming. So depending on what type of regulation you want to achieve, you can change your own pace. So if we want to wake John up for school, we can give him that pressure, right?
We're going quick pressure. Okay.
If you want to calm John, right, we're using kind of a slower pace.
Okay. So roughhousing might be, where a kid feels regulated after.
Yeah.
What about like silliness and laughter where the kid feels like calm after? What would you do then?
Well, tell me more about silliness. Like
actually, let me ask you this. What are the things to watch out for? Like you mentioned roughhousing and wrestling. Sure. Like what are the things to watch out for where you usually see a kid calm?
I'll give another example of something I noticed at school the other day. Was like there was giggling, which is fine. Giggling is okay. It's not like a no fun zone, but it was getting into giggling, like
giggle central.
I could tell it was going to go over the edge at any point. So the two friends, were building with prisms or like blocks. So like made it playful, right? You want to make it playful. It's never shameful. We're not going over and saying like, it's getting too silly, because we don't want to attach
fun.
Right? We don't want to attach shame with it. So making it kind of fun, just observing behavior, which also doesn't have to be a negative thing, but it supports your own self-awareness, your own ability to know what you need. So I just said, I'm hearing a lot of giggling over here. I want to make sure you builders have your muscles ready to keep going with your construction. So come down, lie down with me on our backs. And then them just do what I would call like a popcorn hold. So they cross their arms over their chest. They pull their knees in towards their chest and then lift their head. So they're holding this flexion pattern, but engaging their muscles in a way that's giving them input just by doing that fun popcorn hold. Then we flipped over, and I've heard it called the Superman, but in that environment, it's super person, right?
Super person.
Arms are extended off the floor. You're looking forward with your head up high and your feet are off the floor. And we're holding these for like 30 seconds. And then afterwards, I just gave them like some quick squeezes from shoulder down to wrist on their arm. Oh yeah, now you're ready. You can go back to it. And I walked away, and the conversation that was happening between the two of them after was completely different. They were still having fun, but it was regulated. It was grounded.
Right.
Meaningful, purposeful conversation that wasn't going over the edge.
Right.
So coming back into your body sometimes.
I got you.
So if I saw silliness, that might mean I'm disconnecting a little bit from my brain and body. I need to be pulled back in. And deep pressure is really calming. Deep pressure is a great way to do that.
Which are those rubs that you're talking about?
They can be rubs. It can be activating your muscles in like the popcorn hold or
right, or the super person.
That
right.
Allow them to engage their own muscle system.
Okay. I have a million questions because like I almost want to go through each thing and like how a parent can, but we can't. What are your top, there's so, I mean, because there's so many ways this comes out. And I think it's so helpful to know like a strategy. And I really like how you talked about after a certain thing that your child is like showing up as their, I don't want to say best self, but I'm about to say best self because I can't find a word, but
how about their most regulated self?
Their most regulated self.
Most optimal arousal self.
The optimal arousal self. What are the top 5 takeaways that you want parenting adults to walk away with around the sensory processing stuff?
Yeah, so I think co-regulation is key. So if you're looking for your child to achieve a more calm state or get ready for school. I'll give you the example that I most need to work on. It's like when I want my child to get ready for school faster and I'm going, come on, okay, we're going to be late. That's really disorganizing for her. It's
Yeah.
and what always works better 100% of the time, but I can't always get there. It's like, hey, come on. We're like just using the level of regulation that I want to also see in her, to try to get the match going and almost make a game out of it. Of like, let's see, what color are your shoes that you're going to wear today? And, helping to use my own self to regulate her. So that's a hard example, because I think a lot of us fall into we've got a place to be, it needs to happen fast. But if you're implementing any of these strategies, if you're using a sensory diet, you're also using yourself and watching your own regulation. If you're trying to have things not be too silly, that's not a time to be cracking jokes and also being silly yourself. You're modeling.
Right.
You're using
right.
So the second takeaway, looking at your child's behavior as information for you about what their sensory preferences are. If they are spinning, or they want more vestibular, if they're bumping and crashing, they might want more proprioceptive. If they want tight hugs and heavy things on them, they might like tactile. If they are avoiding bright lights, or they really like a lot of brightly colored things and fast moving objects, visual might be something that's really enticing for them. If they're averse to loud sounds, we're looking at these patterns to give us information about what sensations is my child most drawn to, which ones are they not so into or might be difficult for them. And we're using that to get information for ourselves. Be prepared to be an active guide. So we're not just going to say, you need to calm down, go on over and do a couple jumping jacks. They're not there yet. They need your help.
Yeah.
They need your regulation. They need your guidance. It's not going to happen on their own. And be proactive. So we're not waiting until the dysregulation occurs. We're ideally giving them bursts of their preferred sensory input throughout the day to help support that regulation throughout their day. And then the last is have fun and try your best to not look at it as a task that needs to be done. Have fun and connect with your child and try to achieve that warm engagement with your child, because that will inspire so much growth within their nervous system, is just to feel that connection with you. And if there's something that you find really organizes them, like say Johnny wants the squeezes one day, but the next day he's like, no, don't force it. It's okay.
Right.
It's okay. If something isn't working, we can move on, try again later, or try a different strategy. Always use their cues as information for you about what's working. And leave it. Great. Feel free to leave it.
Right. Emily, thank you so much. This has been so wonderful and so enlightening. And it feels like there is so much to learn about this. And, as a psychologist looking through the lens of mental health and social emotional health, I don't think this way. And I'm seeing just so many crossovers.
Right. Well, and brain and
powerful
body and could have so much to do with mental health that not having
big
right.
Yeah, it's huge. It's huge.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Hey Kiddo. If you like what you hear, give us a review wherever you get your podcasts. Learn more about Hey Kiddo at our website, hey-kiddo.com. Have a question for our experts? Email us at hello@hey-kiddo.com.